But first, Labor members of the Parliamentary Committee looking into the voice scored a big own goal today by trying to deny a voice to the former Prime Minister, Tony Abbott. Abbott had made a formal submission to the committee, notwithstanding its ridiculously short submission time frame, and he asked in it to testify at today's final hearing. At first, it's understood the Labor majority declined Abbott's bid, opting to hear instead from Noel Pearson and Frank Brennan, other voice supporters, along with Warren Mundine, to make the opposition case. But after a Sydney Morning Herald story this morning and Abbott's powerful intervention on Ben Fordham's Radio 2GB, well, the committee relented and they agreed to hear Abbott in person. Here he is.
Giving this voice a right to make representations effectively to everyone on everything is going to make government much more difficult than it already is.
I'm going to talk to my former boss live here a little later on, but this incident highlights the government's almost indecent rush to get this far-reaching change done and its reluctance to be honest with the people about all it entails. If passed, this voice will have a constitutionally guaranteed right to make representations to everyone on everything. And sure, the proposed change doesn't specify that government will have to listen, but you know how this works. Given we can't even land a plane these days without an acknowledgement of country, you can be sure that no decision will be made in Canberra without the voice expressly agreeing to it. Indeed, as several senior retired judges and legal academics have said so far in their submissions, it's more likely than not, if this voice gets up, that the High Court would have an implied right to be heard, that through the High Court, the voice would have an implied right to be heard, and the government would have an implied obligation to listen. Here's two very distinguished legal academics, Professors Nicholas Aroney and Peter Geralgalakis, in a submission to the committee released last Friday, pointing out the significance of the voice getting its own separate chapter, so a new Chapter 9 in our Constitution. The two professors said, and I quote, "While distinct from the Parliament, the Executive and the courts, the Indigenous voice would be accorded a similar constitutional status." Now let that sink in for a moment. A similar constitutional status to the legislative, executive and judicial arms of government. Now this is academic speak for the voice becoming effectively the fourth arm of government. But this isn't what the government wants you to hear. The government only wants you to hear that this is a modest change, no more than the long overdue recognition of Indigenous people in the Constitution, and that to say no would be impolite, disrespectful, maybe even racist. But this is so much more than just recognition. If it was just about recognition, we would simply be looking to amend the preamble to provide that Australia has, and I quote, an Indigenous heritage, a British foundation and an immigrant character, as Abbott has long proposed. Or adding a new section, acknowledging that Aboriginal people were here first, in the same terms as the Parliament agreed without any dissent in 2013, as Father Frank Brennan has previously proposed. But this change is about power, not politeness. It's about making sure that no important decision on anything can be made without significant Aboriginal input. It's about giving less than 4% of our population, those whose ancestry extends back 60,000 years, more of a say than everyone else whose ancestors arrived here since 1788. The government thinks that if people knew what it was really about, they'd vote no. Hence the initial refusal to hear from Tony Abbott today. Hence the initial failure to even have the standard booklet putting out the yes and the no case posted to every Australian voter. Hence the millions and millions of taxpayer dollars that the government will spend to try and combat so-called misinformation that will almost certainly be propaganda for the Yes campaign. If Australians really want every important decision first run past an activist Indigenous voice, and then revised and altered if the voice doesn't like it, and then applied to everyone, Aboriginal or not, well, fair enough. you go and vote yes. But if, like me, you believe our parliament should be colourblind, that our constitution should treat all Australians the same, that there is not and should not be two classes of citizen, then the only way forward is to vote no and reject this race-based voice. I just wish the government would be honest about the voice being a backdoor way to upend Australia's sovereignty 2.5 centuries on, to bring in what amounts to be co-governance by stealth, and for the PM to be honest and upfront about rewriting our history, and honest about the treaties between the Commonwealth Government and all 500 or so Aboriginal tribes in Australia, no doubt with plenty of compensation as well, that the Uluru Statement also demands. The Uluru Statement, I remind my viewers, that the Prime Minister has repeatedly said would be implemented in full. Over the weekend, there was another poll, this one putting the Voice support at 51% and opposition to the Voice at 34%, with a large number of Australians still undecided. Now, this is almost exactly the support that the Republic had a few months out from the referendum, but of course we know the nation rejected 55-45. So Voice skeptics should not lose a heart. The challenge is to get people to understand what this Voice really is about, because trust me, once Australians understand it, they won't like it, and if they believe in equality, they won't vote for it.